Hello everyone and welcome to yesterday's Airlines and Gemini Jet's August released ranking video. Gemini, their releases are often so predictable you can kind of guess them in advance. A bit of Emirates, some United and Delta, the odd, slightly more classic American subjects. But at the same time, they trundle along doing what they do and keeping a sizable chunk of the collectorate quite happy. So you can't really fault them. They're making money, presumably, and they are selling a lot of these models to probably and mainly American collectors, I admit. But they're largely oblivious to the competition, it seems. And so they just keep on doing kind of what they're doing. Now that can mean they produce some really amazing models, and it can mean they produce some really ordinary models. And last month's release set, the images have been out recently and they're getting to market, kind of illustrates that in a sense. You've got some really interesting models here, like the Cubana ATR, which looks like it turned out quite nicely from the picture. You've got that Reno Air MD-90, which looks really impressive. I hope to get that one. The Porter -8 Q400, these are really good quality models that they're putting out. But then you've got some pretty mediocre stuff like the FedEx 757, and the Lufthansa Cargo A321. And then you've got some stuff which is downright not particularly good. Mainly I'm talking about the 767-400, which although they look good in the Gemini photos here, don't look particularly good when you get the mold close to hand. But overall, you have to say there were no tragedies in last month's lot. Judging from the pictures I've seen, all of the models look presentable without dramatic issues. Not that I've looked closely over any of them, I admit. But when you look at the pictures from Gemini, yeah, they look pretty decent. Obviously, always got to take into account the fact that Gemini's photo angle kind of hides a lot of the detail, but can't really say they're a bad bunch of models in terms of the pictures I'm seeing. This month, of course, we have the usual selection, as I've already mentioned, of Gemini models, 10 of them, and it's, you know, pretty much the sort of release set that you could largely guess, with one exception, which kind of stands out as being highly unusual. But you've got to say, on the positive side, there's quite some diversity of molds being used here. Considering you've only got 10 models and you're using a good range of different molds, and they're not all Airbuses and Boeings either, so there's a lot of potential still. Okay, cool. We're going to get in looking at these release rankings. But before I do that, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and chuck a like on the video. Drop a comment too. Always keen to hear what people like out of the sets or don't like. And check me out at Yesterday Airlines on Instagram and Facebook. And of course, yesterdaysairlines.com, the website. If I do get that Reno Air MD-90, then I do probably plan on reviewing it. But haven't got around to buying it yet, actually. And I don't think it's got to the UK either quite yet. But okay, let's get on and check out this month's Geminis. Okay, Gemini and Emirates, their relationship is well known and they produce a large number of Emirates releases. Most recently, they've been releasing some more classic material for Emirates, and they produced that A300 by trying vainly to update the old JetX blue box mold. And this month they kind of added again. We've got, first up, an Airbus A310. I see these Emirates A310s at Gatwick quite a lot, and they were always very welcome. This is when Emirates was a small airline and only had a small fleet. So these date from, you know, early 90s through to the kind of mid to late 90s, I guess. Small titles, Emirates. It's a nice scheme, and you got to say that Emirates has managed throughout their entire history to keep a fairly classy, stylish logo going. Now, when you look at the picture here that Gemini have provided, much like when they sent their image out for the A300, the artwork that Gemini produces conforms very closely to the mold that they're using. And if that mold doesn't look very much like the actual aeroplane, then you can really identify the mold just from the artwork. And here, that is clearly the case again. If you look at the slightly poor shape of the nose and cockpit, if you look at what is clearly going to be a seam line just under the main body, then this immediately is identifiable as the old Gemini Jet's Airbus A310 mould. Now that mould has been updated with aerials and rolling landing gear. It hasn't been used a lot in recent times, and I'd like to think the reason for that was because it's not very good, but I don't know if that is the reason they're not using it much. I just don't think A310s fit into their criteria. Now, I bought this Pan Am example in 2015, and you can see from the pictures that it isn't much of a looker, to be honest. For some reason, this version that I bought, the nose gear didn't even touch the ground. Not a great look straight away. But the seam, it's a little bit chunky. Often these seams that go under the fuselage are quite well hidden. This one isn't. Also, as you can see, there's a complete lack of dihedral on the wings, which really puts those engines almost on the floor. Overall, it was a very disappointing model, and one that I sold as quickly as I could. So I don't expect this Emirates A310 to be substantially different to this Pan Am one in terms of the mould and the way it looks and feels. I get the feeling it will not be a particularly good model. So yeah, it's easy to determine what to do with it, really. I'm going to put it into gas guzzler. I'm not going to give this one a great deal of leeway. Gemini have produced a few A310s in recent years. They produced a trio of SATA Air Azores ones, and they produced an Air Transat one. Those were quite a long time ago, though, so it's been 5 years since this mould has seen the light of day. But to be honest, it will be much better if it never saw the light of day again. It really isn't very good. But we live in hope that JC Wings will one day get that A310 new mould out, the one that I reviewed for them about 2.5 years ago now. Will they ever? Who knows? Okay, next model up is a Delta Airlines A321. So again, this is not a dramatic surprise. Delta is one of their favourite airlines. This one is registered N327DN. It's got the sharklets. It effectively matches a release that they made in 2020. In fact, sorry, this is N328DN, not N327DN, because the last one they made was N327DN. It effectively matches a model, like I say, that they made in 2020, which turned out to be, as you would expect, deeply, deeply ordinary. So there's not a great deal to say about this other than you all know what the Gemini A321 is like. If you've been buying them already, you're probably more happy to buy this one. If you look at the mould as being quite important, you probably won't. And Delta have had an A321 in 400 scale, and that was made by NG Models, an alternative, and that was made in 2020 as well, in September. So that one obviously turned out to look much nicer because the mould is so much better. Yeah, this is classic Gemini material. I don't hate this mould, but at the same time, I don't love it either, and it's certainly inferior to most of the competition that's out there. So I'm going to put this one into Workhorse. Okay, now that brings us into the Boeings, and we start with a MAX 8 N801 Alpha Kilo, and this is in the colours of Alaska Airlines, and this feels like the sort of model which is released every day by both NG and Gemini, but actually it has never been made before. Alaska only operate 4 or 5 737 MAX 8s, 5 actually, and this aircraft, the first one, was released only at the end of December in 2023, so none of them are particularly old, and the other 4 have only come online mid 2024. So they've only got 5. I assume there are going to be more coming. They've also got a large fleet of MAX 9s, but nobody has actually made the Alaska MAX 8 previously. So this one's got a lot of potential. The MAX 8 mold from JC Gemini is very nice. Perhaps not quite as nice as the NG version, but it's nice enough. And this one, I'm sure, will sell super well and is a hole in the market. I'm going to put this one up into supersonic. Their second MAX 8 this month, and the only duplicate model in terms of aircraft type this month, is a United Airlines MAX 8 N17265. This one, yeah, really not as exciting as the Alaska, because this is the third time that Gemini have made a United MAX 8, although one of those did have a special scheme on it. The first time they made one was in January 2022, so not a dramatic amount of time ago, but this is obviously a good shelf-filling model, something that would be popular amongst American collectors, but it isn't particularly exciting. There aren't a great deal of number of alternatives for a United MAX 8. The only one is by Aeroclassics, which I would avoid if I were you. So in that regard, Gemini is the only real game in town for a United MAX 8. This one will be perfectly nice. Looking at the old release, that was decent, and so there's no reason to think this one won't be too, but it has been made before. I'm going to put it into a workhorse. Now we're into a 767-400, and they seem to be really getting through these 767-400s, partly I think because there's so much competition around in this space. And this one is a Delta Airlines aircraft, N845 Mike Hotel. It is wearing the Breast Cancer Research Foundation scheme with the giant pink ribbon on the front. I'm a little surprised that Gemini are making this, because quite often they push these breast cancer models to JC Wings, but they are making it. The mold is rubbish. I mean, it is a bad mold. You may think it looks broadly like a 767, but in any real close look, it has what I think are quite large issues. It certainly doesn't compare to the Panda Models version, which is out there and active, and Panda have announced this exact model in exactly the same scheme. The Gemini will probably get to market first, but that's not a reason to buy it, I would say. The Panda one will be so much better, and that should be where you're putting your dollar if you're interested in this model, in my opinion. So this one for me, I'm going to put down in gas guzzler. I just can't rate this 767-400 mold from Gemini. It's a lazy, half-done mold, generic engines, really poor undercarriage, and a poor tail cone, and various other places. It's not great as well. The 777 this month is in the colours of my favourite airline, Qatar Airways. It is a Qatar Airways cargo freighter, A7 Bravo Foxtrot Tango. There have been, obviously, way too many Qatar 777 freighters, but they've all been, well, not all actually, that's a lie. 2 have been made by NG, 1's been made by Phoenix, 1's been made by JC Wings. But 3 of those are wearing this Move by People scheme. The only standard livery version that's been made before is by NG. What do I think about this one? Yeah, well, it's Qatar, isn't it? I don't love it, but it does come on the excellent interactive mold where you can open the side cargo door. So that gives it a bit more interest and playability. I do like the interactive molds, as I've said many times before. And I'm going to put this one up into High Flyer, seeing as it's only been made once and a static model, and this one is interactive. Okay, so far the releases have been pretty standard Gemini, not overly surprising. But the next few models are a lot more interesting and use some of the excellent regional molds that they have access to. The first one up is the surprise of the month. It is in the colours of an airline which you probably didn't even realise existed, and I wasn't really familiar with until recently. That is Vietnam Air Services Company, or VASCO. It is a Vietnamese regional airline, a subsidiary of Vietnam Airlines itself. It operates 6 ATR-72s on the usual selection of domestic routes inside Vietnam. So it's a slightly weird and unusual subject matter for a company like Gemini, not the sort of thing they would ever usually make. However, as I understand it, this is a collaboration with Panda Fox Toys, because the owner there is a Vietnamese. So I think that is the reason that this has been made. It's nice to see something a bit more unusual from Gemini. It's a little boring in the sense that the livery is bland, really bland actually. Compared to the lovely livery that Vietnam Airlines has, this one is kind of boring. So I'm not loving the scheme, but I do like the concept that they do sometimes produce slightly more out there and unusual airlines. There's 100 probably ATR 72s that I think they should make rather than this one, but that's not going to stop me from putting this one up into high flyer. Should be a nice looking model, slightly obscure airline, but that's quite a good thing usually, but the livery is pretty boring, so that does it down a little. Next up, we've got what appears to be a new mould, though I don't think Gemini have said that, but I assume it will be, and this is a Air Nostrum CRJ 1000 EC Mike Victor Zulu is the registration. It's in the Iberia regional colours. Now, can't really argue that the CRJ 1000, which is basically a long white tube, looks dreadful in a scheme which just has a tiny bit of colour on what is a very small tail on the aircraft. So the scheme looks pretty boring as well. But I like the concept of a new aircraft type, and the CRJ 1000 is a type I'm not overly familiar with. I did look it up before the vid here, and very few were made, and they haven't been operated by many airlines at all. In fact, at the moment, it seems like Air Nostrum really is the primary operator of the type in the world, and there's probably less than 30 or so actually flying. So we've had a very small number of these in service. I think there are a few also floating about with CityJet. Previous operators are like Hop or Britair in France and Garuda Indonesia, but fundamentally, and maybe Aracair, I think, in Nigeria, but they really didn't sell many, mainly because of scope clause issues in the States. And it's a slightly odd looking aeroplane because it is so incredibly long and thin with two tiny engines slapped on the back and what is a very small vertical stabilizer. So, again, don't love the scheme, but I do like the aircraft type, and I like that element of diversity, and I'll put this one also up into high flyer. It's an interesting choice and an aircraft type that I would like to be getting into my collection, but I think I'm going to struggle unless they produce a Garuda one at some point, which I could believe will turn up. So yeah, again, nice choice, and good to get some short haul or medium haul European material out there to collectors as well. I think that will go down well with them. Okay, last civil aircraft of the month, and this one is a real banger, as the kids say. It's another EJet E2, and it is in the colours of Azul, the Brazilian carrier, so it's an E195 E2. PS Alpha Echo Hotel is the registration. The Azul scheme looks excellent on the EJet, and this is a superb little mould from Gemini, so really good to see them using it. This is the third EJet E2 that they have produced. Obviously they produced the KLM and they produced the Porter as well. There has been one announced in the house colours by JC Wings. Who knows when that will show up, but really this should be an excellent little model all around, really, with such a nice scheme. And I have to say the scheme is really nice, and I much prefer this version of a South American flag than I do the LATAM version. But still, it looks really good, and there's nothing bad to say here. It's a great choice. Supersonic, this one, definitely, I think. And probably this is the most interesting, or the best release, I would say, of all of them. But yeah, really nice. Nice to see that one. And that rounds up all the civilian airliners this month. There's just one more aircraft to discuss, and that is a Lockheed C5 Galaxy. It's US Air Force, clearly, and it's in Dover Air Force Base colours. The reg, or the serial, is 461. There's not a lot to say around this one, to be honest. There are only about 50 or so C5s in service, and all of the Air Mobility Command ones are operating out of Travis or Dover Air Force bases. So it's not surprising there have been quite a few Dover Air Force Base C5s from Gemini. In fact, there have been 4 or 5. So it's a fairly regular release. Again, this one, much like that United Max, can be seen as a model which is continuously going to sell, and this is a good way to top up, I guess, the inventory. So perfectly fine release. The C5 mold looks pretty good. In fact, I saw one just at the Manchester aviation fair that I was at, and I really liked it. It's the first time I'd seen it in person. So great mould, but US Air Force schemes aren't very interesting, so they all look kind of the same. Just got the little flash on the tail. So I'm going to put this one in the workhorse because it's been made before. It doesn't say it's going to be a bad model. I think it'll be really nice, but not particularly exciting. Okay, cool. That rounds up this month's Geminis. Quite like doing these Gemini videos because there's only 10 models and it makes it a lot quicker to discuss, and you get to look perhaps in more detail at the models and what's been made by others. Yeah, some nice stuff here, but it is not a surprising Gemini month really in many ways as well. So definitely a couple of nice models that should be really good. Definitely a couple of really ordinary models that will be fine, and definitely a couple of not particularly good models that will be pretty bad. And that kind of rounds up Gemini in a nutshell. So sure, there's definitely stuff here if you're an American collector, because there's a lot of American material here as per usual, but not as much as there are in some months. I mean, you've only got 4 civilian aircraft here from the States, which I guess is a relatively low number, and nice to see at least a little bit of love for Europe and South America. Phoenix have also announced their 400 scale releases over the last week, so I'll get to a Phoenix video next, I think. But that's it from me at Yesterday's Airlines today. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.